Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks.
The night was supposed to be calm, filled with warm, festive lights and the joy of Christmas. Instead, it began with a chilling realization. A shadow darted past my front yard, disappearing behind the bushes. My heart stopped. Someone was out there. This all began 2 years ago at Christmas time. I worked in a large office with dozens of people, each of us minding our own lives but coming together occasionally for events like the annual holiday party. Our department, about 20-something people, had a tradition, a small celebration with a gift exchange. Everyone would draw a name to determine whose gift they'd buy. I drew Amanda, a close friend of mine, and spent an afternoon shopping for the perfect present. As I wandered through the store aisles trying to pick something she'd like, I spotted Mike, a co-worker I'd always found unsettling. He worked in another room, distant enough to avoid much contact, but his reputation preceded him. Whispers of strange behavior had floated through the office, and our few interactions were awkward at best. He was standing in the distance, not looking in my direction. Still, I decided not to approach him. Something about his demeanor made me uneasy. He wasn't shopping, just lingering. Shrugging it off, I finished my errand and left. The day of the Christmas party arrived, and as expected, it was light-hearted and cheerful. When it was time to exchange gifts, I was handed a package from none other than Mike. I tore the wrapping to reveal a teddy bear with hearts embroidered on its fur. It seemed like a sweet, albeit overly personal gesture. I thanked him politely, not thinking much of it at the time. The party ended without incident, and life returned to normal, or so I thought. A few nights later, I was home alone, enjoying a quiet evening. I lived in a small rental house in a relatively peaceful neighborhood. Everything about the night felt ordinary until it was time for bed. That's when I glanced out the front window and saw it, a figure moving quickly behind the bushes in my yard. It was so sudden I couldn't make out who it was. Panic bubbled inside me. Why would someone be sneaking around my house at this hour? My hands shook as I made my way through the house, ensuring every door was locked and window secured. Just as I finished checking the back of the house, I heard it, the faint rattle of my front doorknob. I froze. Someone was trying to get in. Grabbing my phone, I moved cautiously to another window and peeked out, but whoever it was had vanished. I stood there, holding my breath, eyes scanning the yard for movement. Several minutes passed. Just when I thought it might be over, I saw him. A man emerged from behind my car in the driveway, walking toward the house. My stomach dropped as I recognized him. It was Mike. I backed away from the window, heart racing. How did he know where I lived? Why was he here? Moments later, he tried the door again, jiggling the handle more forcefully this time. My instinct screamed at me to call the police, so I dialed 911 and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, a loud bang echoed through the house. He was trying to break in. I clutched my phone tightly, speaking in a whisper as I described what was happening. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Why was Mike doing this? What did he want? Relief came in the form of flashing red and blue lights outside my window. I heard the officers shouting commands, followed by the distinct sound of Mike being taken into custody. When it was safe to leave my room, I stepped outside and saw several police cars parked in my driveway. The officers informed me that Mike had been caught attempting to break into my home, but what they discovered next sent shivers down my spine. During their investigation, it came to light that Mike hadn't originally drawn my name for the gift exchange. He had traded with another co-worker, claiming he had the perfect idea for me. Inside the teddy bear he gave me was an AirTag, a tracking device. Mike had been using it to monitor my location ever since the party. Hearing this made my skin crawl. The thought of him knowing my every move, of him standing outside my house in the dead of night filled me with a horror I couldn't shake. I was grateful to the police for their swift action, but the experience left a permanent mark. Mike's obsession had crossed into dangerous territory, and if not for the malfunctioning lock on my door or the quick response of law enforcement, who knows what might have happened. That Christmas, I learned the true meaning of unease. The cheerful lights and festive spirit were overshadowed by the memory of Mike's shadow lurking in my yard. Even now, the sight of a teddy bear fills me with dread, a reminder of how quickly something innocent can turn sinister. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in horror movies, they're the ones you think you know. Christmas mornings are meant to bring joy, but that year, it brought something far more chilling. I was 10, the youngest in a family of 5. Our home had 2 levels. My parents and siblings all stayed on the main floor, while I had my bedroom in the basement. It gave me privacy, but sometimes being so far from everyone else felt isolating, especially on cold, silent nights. That Christmas morning, something woke me early. Not the kind of excitement you'd expect, but a strange, unnerving feeling. It was just past 6 when I slipped out of bed, my small feet padding across the cold basement floor. The house was eerily still, save for the faint hum of the furnace. As I crossed the basement living room to the stairs, I felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable sensation of being watched. And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, in the cluttered storage room to my right, a shadow moved. I froze mid-step. My breath hitched as I dared a glance. There, half hidden among the boxes, was the faint outline of a man. My heart pounded. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mind scrambled for an explanation. It had to be Dad or my older brother playing some cruel prank, right? I bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I almost convinced myself that my brother was right, until I saw him. From behind a stack of boxes, a man emerged. He was filthy, his hair matted, his beard unkempt. His clothes hung loosely, torn and grimy. He stared at me with hollow, sunken eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, he took a step toward me. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I screamed and ran up the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me. Bursting into the living room, I yelled, "There's a man in the basement!" Chaos erupted. My dad jumped to his feet and grabbed the nearest object, a fire poker. He positioned himself at the top of the basement stairs, shouting for the man to leave. The rest of us huddled in my parents' bedroom, my mom frantically calling the police. From behind the locked door, we heard it. Faint, shuffling footsteps from below. My dad shouted again, and moments later, we heard the sound of a window sliding open. When the police arrived, they searched the area and found the man hiding behind our neighbor's shed. He had broken into our house through a basement window sometime during the night. What haunted me most was the thought of him lurking in the basement while I slept, just a thin wall separating me from him. That Christmas morning, the presents under the tree meant nothing. What I'll always remember is the face of that stranger, the man who turned the happiest morning of the year into my most chilling nightmare. The night was cold and crisp, with a faint veil of snow falling outside, casting a silvery glow across the city. I remember walking into the Christmas party with excitement, my breath visible in the frosty air. The party was being hosted by Jim and Vanessa, a couple from our close-knit friend group. Their apartment complex was luxurious, and they had rented out the recreation room for the evening. A warm, festive space filled with laughter, the scent of mulled wine, and the hum of holiday cheer. The room was packed, easily 30 or 40 people, most of whom I'd known for years. There were a few unfamiliar faces, but that's how parties go. Friends bring +1s, and new connections are made. Except for her. From the moment I spotted her, something felt off. She stood near the edge of the crowd, sipping from a glass, her eyes scanning the room in a way that felt more observant than social. She was striking dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, but I couldn't place her. No one introduced her, and she didn't seem to be chatting with anyone in particular. Every now and then I'd catch her watching me, or at least it felt that way. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin. People said their goodbyes, hugged, and headed home. By the time I decided to leave, there were maybe 15 or so people left. She was still there, sitting in the corner, her presence as quiet and unsettling as it had been all night. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to her being shy or a tag-along of someone I hadn't spoken to. I grabbed my coat, said my goodbyes, and stepped out into the biting night air. The drive home was uneventful at first, the streets nearly deserted. It wasn't until I was about 2 minutes away from my apartment that I noticed it. At a red light, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and there she was. Her car was directly behind mine. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she lived nearby. Maybe we just happened to be taking the same route. But as I continued driving, every turn I made, she made too. My stomach twisted. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the air in my car felt heavy. I parked in my usual spot, and she parked a few spaces away. As I stepped out, I could hear the faint click of her car door opening behind me. My heart was pounding now, the crisp air no longer refreshing but suffocating. She was walking toward me. I didn't wait. I quickened my pace, fumbling for my keys, and slipped into the building. The door shut behind me with a heavy metallic thud. For a moment I felt safe. I climbed the stairs quickly, then peered out a nearby window. She was standing outside the door. She didn't have a key to get in, which confirmed what I already knew. She didn't live here. But why had she followed me? Who was she? I retreated to my apartment, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. My fingers trembled as I typed into the group chat. "Hey, does anyone know the woman in the black dress from the party?" Responses came quickly, but none of them provided answers. No one knew her, not a single person. Everyone had assumed she was someone else's guest. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, checking the locks on my doors and peering out the windows. By morning she was gone. Her car, her presence, all of it. But sometimes, on cold, quiet nights, I swear I feel someone watching from the shadows outside my window. And the worst part, I never saw her again. It was the night before Christmas, a night meant for peace and joy, but instead, it became the most terrifying night of my life. The evening had started like any other holiday night. My family and I were in the living room, the soft glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the windows as we wrapped gifts and laughed at cheesy holiday specials. Everything felt warm, safe, and ordinary. Until the first knock came. It was a little after 11 p.m., far too late for visitors, especially on Christmas Eve. We weren't expecting anyone, so the sound startled us. The knock was firm and deliberate, breaking through the comforting hum of the TV. But 30 minutes later, the knock came again. This time it was louder. I got up again, this time more hesitant. When I looked out the window, my heart sank. Not only was the man back, but he wasn't alone. Another man stood beside him, equally motionless, their faces obscured in the shadows. "They're back," I said, my voice shaking now. My parents, sensing my fear, came over to look. We stared out the window together, our confusion turning into dread. "Don't open the door," my mum whispered. The men stood there for what felt like an eternity before finally turning away, but instead of heading back toward the street, they moved to the side of the house. My dad, his protective instincts kicking in, threw open the front door and yelled, "What do you think you're doing?" The men didn't respond. They didn't even flinch. They just kept walking, disappearing into the shadows around the side of the house. "They're going to the backyard," I said, panic rising in my voice. After a tense few minutes of watching and waiting, we convinced ourselves they were gone. Maybe they'd realized we were home and decided to leave. Reluctantly, we went back to the living room, though the festive mood was long gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. My curiosity got the better of me, a decision I'd regret. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the backyard through the sliding door. The cold air bit at my skin, and the silence was deafening. The beam of the flashlight cut through the dark, but the shadows seemed thicker, heavier than usual. I took a few cautious steps toward the back of the yard, near the line of trees. That's when I saw them. From behind a large tree, the two men emerged, their movements sudden and violent. They were sprinting straight at me. My heart nearly stopped as fear took over. I didn't think. I just ran. My legs moved faster than they ever had, carrying me back toward the house. The sound of their footsteps pounded behind me, closing the distance. I reached the sliding door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut just as they reached it. Their faces were mere inches from the glass, twisted in frustration. They tried the handle, rattling it violently, then pounded on the door with their fists. When the police arrived, the men were long gone. They searched the yard, finding nothing, but a patrol car spotted the pair walking down a street a few blocks away. The officers told us the men likely had no specific reason for targeting our house. They were probably just looking for a place to break into. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. Even now, I can still see their faces pressed against the glass, hear the pounding of their fists, and I'll never forget the sound of their footsteps chasing me through the dark. That Christmas Eve, our home was visited, but it wasn't by Santa Claus. It was Christmas Day, a time for joy and celebration. But little did we know it would become a day etched into our memories for all the wrong reasons. Our home, usually filled with the warmth of family and laughter, became the stage for an unnerving encounter that still sends shivers down my spine. The day started like any other Christmas. Family members arrived around noon, their cars lining the street outside our modest yet cozy house. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, not isolated, but peaceful enough to let your guard down. By the time everyone had settled in, the festive spirit was in full swing. That's when the first strange thing happened. Someone mentioned an unfamiliar car parked in our driveway. A large SUV with windows so darkly tinted, it seemed to swallow the daylight. Curious, I moved to the front window and peered out. The vehicle idled silently, its engine humming like an ominous heartbeat. No one exited, and it didn't drive away. The SUV just sat there, its faceless occupant shrouded in mystery. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone was lost or visiting a neighbor and had mistakenly parked in our driveway. Steeling myself, I opened the front door and stepped into the cold December air. But the moment my foot touched the yard, the SUV backed out abruptly, its tires crunching against the snowy pavement. It sped off down the street before I could approach it. I returned inside, brushing off the incident as strange but harmless. The afternoon wore on, filled with laughter, food, and the comfort of family. After dinner, a group of us decided to take a stroll around the neighborhood. Despite the snow, the air was unusually mild, and the quiet streets were inviting. As I reached for my coat near the front door, I froze. The SUV was back, sitting in the driveway like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. My pulse quickened. Why would it return? Determined to confront whoever was behind this, I opened the door and stepped out once more. As if on cue, the SUV's engine roared to life, and it backed out with the same urgency as before, vanishing into the night. This time, I caught a clearer look at the windows, so dark they reflected nothing. It was as if the vehicle itself was a shadow, hiding secrets I didn't want to uncover. Night fell, and one by one our family members began to leave. By 9 p.m. the house was quiet again, just my wife and me left to enjoy the last hours of Christmas. We curled up in the living room, letting a movie play in the background as the earlier events faded into an uneasy memory. That's when my wife's voice broke the silence. She had gone to grab something from the kitchen but stopped near the front window. "It's back," she said, her tone barely above a whisper. I joined her, peering through the curtain. There it was, the same SUV sitting in our driveway like a predator sizing up its prey. Its engine purred, a low, menacing sound. We stood there, frozen, watching the car for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes passed, maybe more, but nothing happened. The doors didn't open. No one stepped out. It just sat there, watching us, as if daring us to make a move. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the door and flung it open, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This time I ran straight for the SUV, determined to catch whoever was inside. But just as before, it reversed with chilling precision, speeding away before I could even reach it. Breathless and frustrated, I returned to the house. My wife and I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound. But the SUV never came back. To this day, I still don't know who was inside that car or why they chose our house. The tinted windows, the eerie silence, the way it seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. It all felt like a sinister game, one we unknowingly became a part of. Christmas has never felt the same since.